What's up, everybody? Carolina just survived a week that felt like a basketball obstacle course. First, St. Bonaventure dragged them into a game that looked like it was being played in a parking deck. Then Michigan State showed up and reminded everybody that Tom Izzo creates his players in a steel mill. And now Carolina heads to Rupp Arena, a place where the crowd is loud, the rims are tight, and the officials may or may not know who the home team is. After that, it's Georgetown at home. A classic don't play down, don't make it weird, don't turn this into a 40-minute group project game. It's a big week. It's a weird week. It's a very Carolina basketball week. I'm Joey Powell. This is the Coast to Coast. Let's get into it before something gets more complicated. Man, happy late Thanksgiving to everybody who is joining us tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. I'm Joey Powell. This is the Coast to Coast, brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt on InsideCarolina.com. Hope that you guys had a very positive holiday with your families. Sean, I'll come to you first. Favorite Thanksgiving meal that you just had, or what was the favorite part of your Thanksgiving meal?
Favorite part was how easy it was this year without any cooking. So just had delivery with some neighbors and trying to wrangle a 2.5-year-old and a 2-week-old together. So
dope. Love that. Sherrell, what was the favorite part of your Thanksgiving meal?
We got a smoked turkey this year, so that was number one. And then my wife made some broccoli casserole, which was delicious. So those two things. Let me ask you something, Joey.
Yeah.
When do you stop eating Thanksgiving food?
When it's gone.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, look, I grew up in a house where leftovers were just as much of a planned thing as the actual meal was. So, we'll work on it until it's gone. And then my wife went and made chili tonight, so I got food for days around here. Y'all check me out in about 3 weeks when I weigh about 3 1/4. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Appreciate everybody who's joining us tonight live. If you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to us later on via podcast, hey, we're glad you're a part of the show. Make sure you drop a rating or review and hit that subscribe button when you can. Let's go back and look at the week that was for Carolina basketball. First things first, we had what felt like toughness, kind of a referendum on Carolina's toughness in 2 basketball games, right? Carolina ground out a game against St. Bonaventure and then squared up with Michigan State. Man, this was pretty loaded. I want to go back to St. Bonaventure and start there. It wasn't pretty. Carolina didn't get to run downhill as much as I think they wanted to. It was a slap fight, but honestly, I think that's why it mattered. And I think Carolina was probably going to use a little bit of that in the game against Michigan State until they didn't. But Carolina didn't fold when possessions got long. They didn't bail when the game went physical, and I think that's growth from last year. Sherrell, I'm going to ask you first. What impressed you the most about how Carolina handled that physical, slower game than usual St. Bonaventure, who had, like we said, some veteran guys that could score?
It felt a lot like an opening round NCAA game when you're kind of a lower seed, like a 5-12, 6-11 type deal. Maybe St. Bonaventure isn't going to be that good, towards the end of the year. But that's kind of what it felt like, in that it took UNC a little bit to kind of understand exactly what the opponent was trying to do and then to be able to counter it. Because they had been playing some weaker competition. And this was, albeit not a step up to the ACC level, it was a step up from what they've been playing. So it felt like they kind of, not to use the overused cliche, but they kind of took a punch. And then they were a little wobbly and then able to really assert themselves in a lot of ways, mostly because of Henry Veesaar. And to a degree, Caleb Wilson. Both of those guys just, shine. So I thought it was impressive in that they got hit really hard by a physical veteran team, and then they were able to bounce back there in the second half and make it really not even a close game there after the under 8 timeout. So that was impressive to me.
Sean, what did you see from an execution standpoint against St. Bonaventure that you liked that you felt like was probably the difference between a win and a loss against the Bonnies?
Well, I think in the second half, just the crispness that the offense operated, which allowed them to get to those 8 threes and shoot it at a high percentage. And I think once they got rolling, then you could see the confidence come back versus what we saw in that first half when they gave up the run. But to me, it was the crispness and 5 operating as one, where they're able to really jump on them from the beginning in that second half and take that lead, push it out, and then coast the rest of the way versus what we've seen in years past of getting those leads and then giving them up pretty quickly. So it was more just operating as a team, and the 3-point shooting going down at a steady clip.
That felt like a good everybody knows their role game against a little bit better competition. Do you feel the same way, Sean?
Yeah, which what we saw this over the weekend is a team that, not to make excuses for it, but without Seth Trimble, is a totally new. Everybody's new, whether they're freshmen or they're transfers coming in and playing together. So I still think there is that learning curve that we're going to see just from playing together, as well as the role. And I think the roles still need some definement, but I think you're starting to see Kayla Wilson exert that alpha 1A presence. I think, we talked about it last week, Henry, in terms of probably the most well, you can talk about talent in different ways, but just what he can produce offensively. And then, from the guards and wings, what they're able to do. So I do think we started to see it. I know we'll talk about Michigan State. I think there's still a lot of, especially with Trimble out, how do some of the guards and wings fit together, as well as how do you continue, really knowing that, hey, your best players are the front court from Wilson and Veesaar. How do they keep operating at a high level together, and that you don't kind of deviate into too much one-on-one or ball stopping, I think is a big question mark for me as we go forward.
So let's go ahead and talk about the Michigan State game. I think first things first, this is a editorializing post, but since I have the microphone, I'll do this. We mentioned last year, the three of us knew that this season, every game was going to be some sort of referendum on Hubert Davis as a coach. I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way now. We're not going to do that here. North Carolina is not going to fire the coach in the middle of the season. North Carolina is not going to fire him after the next time they lose. So our job is to look at the games, see what we see, make some educated analysis, and kind of prompt some discussion amongst the IC community. You can have opinions about Hubert Davis. You can consider what you think he is or is not as a coach. That's fine. But that's not really going to be the wide angle that we take here on this show. Now, we will criticize when there are great coaching, when there are bad coaching moves, and we'll say when there's great coaching moves. But I think there's a lot of extremism in the fan base, and this isn't me telling somebody how to be a fan, but I do think there's a lot of extreme feelings about Hubert Davis that are either solidified or I guess reinvigorated with every loss. And North Carolina lost their first game to Michigan State, and we saw a lot of that stuff pop out. Just want to give you guys a heads up. It's not something we're going to do here. So first things first, I mean, we knew Michigan State was going to be the real test. Tom Izzo teams are generally not fake tough. They are typically really good in November. They make you earn every single inch of offense. They make you earn every rebound you get. They make you earn every cut you may or not be able to make on offense. And I feel like Carolina had stretches where they absolutely looked the part. Flip side, and then there were moments where it was very clear this group is still trying to figure out some of its in-game identity. Who does the ball go to? How do they want to close out? Who do they trust most when things get tight? I will say the physicality of Michigan State did not seem to overwhelm North Carolina during that game. Sherrell, what was your gut reaction when you saw North Carolina just matching up against Michigan State, independent of the score?
Yeah, I thought it seemed like there was an athleticism deficit for UNC. Not necessarily, Yeah, obviously we know Caleb Wilson is athletic, and we know that Henry Veesaar in his own way is athletic. But from a 1 through 10 perspective, Michigan State was much more athletic, in my opinion. That's not something you see often with a Big Ten team, as Sean has said on this podcast for I feel like a decade now. You don't often see Big Ten teams who are more athletic than ACC, SEC, Big 12 teams, and that was the case against Michigan State. And I think it definitely helped Michigan State, not just from a scoring perspective, but from a rebounding and from a defensive perspective. They were just much quicker. Now, dare I say, a little more aggressive when it comes to rebounding than North Carolina was. And then defensively, to me, obviously the open shots are a big thing. It wasn't like UNC was getting terrible looks. A lot of them just weren't going in. The big thing for me was the assist rate. Um, Michigan State really locked down on Carolina's guards, and Carolina's guards weren't able to create in this particular game. For the season, UNC's assist rate, that's the field goals that are assisted, is right around 60%. And in this game, it was 42. So to me, that said a lot of it. And part of it was those missed shots, but to me, that was a big deal. So, I thought the athleticism was the big thing that jumped out to me. That I was surprised that there was that big of a difference between Michigan State and Carolina when it comes to that.
Yeah, hold the thought on the shot discussion. That's coming. I think that's kind of low hanging fruit. Sean, we talked about Jeremiah Fears and what he meant to that team, but just from an execution standpoint, you saw Jeremiah Fears doing almost what he wanted to do. Obviously, not having Seth Trimble makes it different for North Carolina defensively, because Trimble would have drawn that assignment. It would have made things probably not as easy. I'm not saying it would have changed the outcome, but would have made things different for Michigan State on offense. But when you've got Fears getting where he wants to get, kind of, and he's not a guy that necessarily looks to shoot first, but he was able to get a lot of his offense whenever it seemed like he wanted to, when he didn't want to get other guys involved. It just looked like Michigan State was better executing. And I'll give you an example. Fears took a shot with a shot clock winding down almost at the end of a possession. He's between the top of the key and the free throw line, off 1 foot, falling away with Henry Veesaar right in his face, and he banks it in. Right now, the bank shot, okay, you can say that's luck or whatever, but I felt like that just encapsulated Michigan State's ability to execute where North Carolina could not. Did you feel like that was kind of the theme for most of the game, at least when Michigan State stretched it out and closed it out?
I think it was the theme from the time UNC got up 7 and Henry had to go to the bench for the second foul, which, by the way, I've watched that in super slow-mo and still struggle to understand how that was a foul on him. But
he had position. I don't know how it was a foul on Veesaar. He had position.
He had position. His hands were up, a hand in his back and a knee in his. But anyway, that you could see as soon as he left, you knew a run was most likely going to come. But UNC felt like a fish out of water offensively, trying to then match up with Michigan State. And I think from that point forward, even though the possession game was the lowest that we might see all season, it did feel like UNC was almost sped up in that they were trying to get that lead back. Everything was one possession. They had to get it back. And if they didn't, then it just felt like they were building more pressure on themselves. And in turn, Michigan State, that first, say, 7 or 8 minutes, it was like a boxing match where everybody was feeling each other out. Each person was landing, but they're still dancing around a little bit. And then coming into that second half, Michigan State felt comfortable, and they were able to exert some of that strength. They were able to get, some of the shots they missed in the first half maybe weren't as contested as much, or they were able to get a little more space on those pick and rolls and get into that 12 to 15 foot area where they were comfortable taking those shots, no different than Maui last year. And they were going in, and they were getting, them open from Kohler to Fears. Fears goes 8 for 10. I know he talked a lot during the game, and that's how Michigan State likes to play, but it gave them confidence that, hey, even if they're going to go on a 5-0 run, we can answer it back between our execution, both offensively and defensively. And I think Michigan State continued to execute across the board, and UNC was up and down. Now, obviously, if you could probably pick out a lot of different shots, maybe that Evans 3 from the left wing to cut it to 2. Maybe that change, like you could say a lot could change it, but at the end of the day, Michigan State fully controlled that game once they took the lead, and from the starters to the bench, which I think depth is a primary concern. They were able to execute better across the board, more consistently.
I don't have the stats in front of me. When I was watching that first half, it felt as if as soon as Veesaar got that second foul and went to the bench, that North Carolina's offensive efficiency went to about like a 0.5 from what felt like 1.1, 1.2 early in the game, because everything at that point just became difficult. And that's where, when you don't have the gravity that Veesaar brings right now, and he's pretty efficient, then the Michigan State defense started doing what Michigan State's defenses typically do. And I think it was really, really weird to see. I think
sorry, just one thought on that. Caleb Wilson, who was phenomenal to start and came out with the first quick 10, I think. And then he went an extremely long stretch of, I'd say, not affecting the game from a scoring perspective. And I think not having Veesaar, now all of a sudden, on a one-on-one battle, he would have been able to get by in a one-on-one game against his defender anytime. But now you watch the game or watch the replays, and Michigan State has 4 guys in the paint, 2 guys touching him, just making life a lot harder. We talked about his deficiency as a 3-point shooter. So now you're playing off of him, almost daring him to shoot. And now he's thinking a little bit more. He's not passing as quickly. And that also played into it as well.
It was the first time, to his credit, all season that he looked frustrated. I know the Navy game, there was frustration, but that wasn't because he couldn't, get to a spot or do what he wanted to do. And it was the first time he met real resistance. It was like, no, we Michigan State, we're not going to allow you to do what you like to do. What's your counter? And for 7 games, that's pretty impressive. That's the first time that's happened. And again, there aren't going to be many teams with the ability, the talent, the moxie, and the coaching acumen of Michigan State to be able to limit him like that. But it was the first time, and it's not a knock on him. He's a freshman. It's going to happen, even if he's one of the 3 best freshmen in Carolina's probably maybe ever had. It was just, that was the first time you kind of really saw it, where he was maybe pressing a little bit, trying to take the team on his back in a different way from what he did at Navy.
Yeah. So I think it was the first time he kind of disappeared a little bit, and the timing was really bad. But you also have to recognize that that's not just North Carolina going into a shell. That's Michigan State controlling some of it as well. And that's the thing I think people forget, is that Michigan State is a top 10 team. Again, Tom Izzo is very well known as having his teams ready earlier in the year. I mean, they've been really good in November, December for a long time. So you have to kind of recognize that they were dictating toward North Carolina a little bit.
Sorry, Joey, I hate to interrupt. Sorry, last thing. And I was gonna say too, and with all that, as poorly as they shot, Veesaar in foul trouble, not a lot of stuff from the bench, and they still, we're down 4 with at the under 8. It kind of got away from them a little bit after that. I'm kind of hazy. I was watching 2 games at once, but it kind of got away from them then. But they still were in the game with a chance to come back and be right there, despite them obviously playing their poorest game of the season, and a game where there's only 61 possessions, that's UVA 2018 territory. 61 possessions.
So this is where I want to share some. I'm trying to pull up some stats really quick. Something I want to share is, the first game against St. Bonaventure, North Carolina shot 8 of 18 from behind the arc. Same gym. Usually if a team's going to have issues shooting poorly, it's their first foray, their first contest in a new environment. But they shot 8 of 18. It's not great, but they hit 4 more threes than they did against Michigan State, which that changes the game because that's 12 more points. Against Michigan State, it was 4 of 23 from deep. And I think the thing that would scare a lot of people is most of those shots, I felt like we're fairly open. So when you're thinking about this team, are you now worried that this team can't shoot? Or do you feel like that was just a bad night up against up against a team that plays good defense. And also think there's something to mention as well. Michigan State makes you work very, very hard. And so you're having to work harder on offense and defense, which will take away some of your legs. So I think that probably had something to do with it. But Sherrell, is this team a poor shooting team? Or do you feel like that may have been more of the exception rather than the rule?
Was it Bill Parcells? Your record, you are what your record says you are? That was his whole thing? I mean, the stats say that this is a poor shooting team right now. They're 220th in 3-point field goal percentage. So that's not good. I mean, those are the numbers. Do I think it'll get better? Absolutely. I think it'll get better. Michigan State, again, is a tough opponent whose entire identity is to keep you from getting what you want. And they did that, which was Wilson and Veesaar. So what was next is North Carolina shooting threes. So it's almost a situation where they got baited into taking, I think, those 23 threes, because that's what Michigan State wanted them to do based upon their shooting so far this season. I think Kyan Evans will get better. I think Luka Bogovac will get better. There's no way this team can be successful on the season shooting that poorly. They're at, I believe, 31% from three for the season, 31.8%.
Yeah,
if they shoot, if they shoot that kind of way the rest of the year, they're not going to reach any of their goals. So I think it'll improve. One is the competition, I guess, the lessons, for lack of a better word, over the next month or so. And then two is everybody continues to get more comfortable with each other. A part of it too, we talked about Caleb Wilson and Henry Veesaar being sped up a little bit. They've got to do a better job as well of passing back out after initial post. I think that was something that surprised me. There was, maybe an initial post, they get the ball, maybe they pass back, just keep looking for your guys instead of going 1-on-3 or doing something that maybe isn't the best shot. So I think that'll come with time as the team learns each other. But yes, for now, through what we've seen, we can only go by what we've seen. This is not a good shooting team, but I think it'll get better.
Sean, obviously Seth Trimble's ability to attack the basket and get downhill will create a little more openness from the perimeter for these guys. But again, when I'm looking at some of the shots they got against Michigan State, they were open looks. Is there something they can do to help themselves get more open looks, assuming that they can start hitting them?
Good question. But, I think to start, is this a good shooting team? And I know we've talked about it all summer and felt like they did put pieces together, but you're also working, even if Trimble was playing, he's not a shooter. Wilson's not a shooter. So there's two guys that aren't shooters. Veesaar is a big, he's hit some threes early on. You add Stevenson, not, from percentage wise, not a shooter. So you do have a lot of pressure on three guys in Evans, Luka, and then Powell. And so far, those guys have not delivered from a 3-point perspective. So instead of rolling out, hey, a team of 4 or 5 shooters, you are very limited in the guys that we think can hit shots. But I think in terms of the openness, having Trimble, what we saw in the second half of Kansas, you look at Kyan Evans, who has struggled. Once again, if he's maybe made 2 or 3 threes at this point in time, that would be a drastic change in percentage. But the second half of Kansas, 2 of the threes he made were in transition. One was a pitch ahead to Trimble, and then he got it back from him wide open. Another with Trimble, got the rebound and pushed it up the court, and Evans was able to act as a 2-guard, caught on the right wing. I think for him, there's probably 2 main issues. One is when he's shooting beyond NBA range, he's 1 for 7. So he's got to stop taking those extremely deep threes. But at the same time, he does have a slower release. So it's almost like he needs that extra space, especially against those taller, longer defenders to get there. But I think if there's a way, especially coming off of defensive rebounding, if it's Caleb, Luka, Derek Dixon, if they can take pressure and push the ball up, I think that could help. I mean, we saw it. I referenced the miss on the left wing. He was wide open, looked good, everything about it when Powell hit him. He just needs, I think, more open looks or looks in the span of the half-court offense where it's coming off of 3-4 passes or a kick out. Luka, I think, has a much better ability to create for himself and get shots off. in my mind, when he shoots it, I think it's going in, even though he has not proven that yet. But I'm hoping he's going to start to put it together because he has a lot more. His ability to get shots is a lot easier, just given some of the off ball, the dribbling and a little more quickness that he does have. And then Powell, would love to see. I think one of the main positives for me from Michigan State was the play of Powell. I know he had 1-3. He had another 3 that could have staved off the run, or sorry, he missed another 3 that could have staved off some of that 12-0 run in the first half. But it looked like he was playing with a lot more confidence, and he got 7 rebounds. So the fact that he was doing more than just catching and shooting was a big positive for me. So hopefully he can do that more. But and I think getting in transition, trying to find shooters that way, and then in the half court, it goes back to that ball movement and trying to put pressure on the defense. So you're hitting 3-4 passes, the defense isn't rotating quick enough, and now you're getting a wide open shot. So that to me, I think are all easily achievable things with or without Seth Trimble.
Yeah, so I think there's another real gigantic elephant in the room, and it's not that I want to pick on players, but there's a giant problem backing up Henry Veesaar right now. I think that we saw it a couple of times earlier this year. We've seen some short instances where Zayden High and James Brown look like they might be net neutrals. But right now, the depth in the post is a problem for this team. So much that I'm wondering, and I posed this on X, formerly known as Twitter, now known as Twitter again, or whatever you want to call it. I posed the other day, should North Carolina, when Seth Trimble comes back healthy, consider going to a 5-out when Veesaar is on the bench, right? I think a lot of folks think that, Jaren Stevenson could play the post, and he's tall, but that doesn't make him a post player. I think, it might be a decent situation where they could go 5-out because right now, a lot of times, if you see James Brown or Zayden High come in the game, the first 1 or 2 possessions that they're in there, they look as confused as a goat on AstroTurf. It's just frustrating. It's spastic. It's not the neutral or even keel performances that Hubert Davis needs. Now, I'm not talking about like going in and playing well. I'm talking about just coming in and being steady. Sherrell, how do you feel about the potential of maybe playing 5-out or going to a 5-out while Henry Veesaar sits? Is that too much of a philosophical change, or do you think it's something that might actually be able to exploit where they may have a mismatch with some of their personnel?
Well, so first, let me say that when you're talking about developing players, like they have to play some in order to develop. So
Yes.
there is a bit of a chicken and an egg thing because people are like, oh, UNC's got to develop players. They got to develop. Well, they have to be able to play to do that. However, if they're not quite there yet, then that can hurt the team. So it is a balancing act that I think the UNC staff and really any staff has to make. As far as what you're saying, I mean, this is year 5 of Hubert Davis, right? We kind of know how he handles things, and he's going to cut the rotation. He always does. Even usually the rotation isn't that much to start with. This year is it feels a little different. It's like they're playing more guys, but 100%, the rotation is going to be cut during big games. And so you start thinking about, well, what's going to get cut? In that Kansas game, I think did Veesaar, I'm trying to remember, did he play 37 minutes? I think he played the entire second half.
Yeah.
And maybe 37 minutes for the game or something like that. This is bad radio, but yeah, he
It's
played
okay.
38 minutes.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, he played 38 minutes. So that's what's going to happen. You've seen how he's going to handle things. The only reason he didn't play 38 minutes against Michigan State is because he was in foul trouble. So Hubert Davis is already telling you what he's going to do in these big games moving forward. And it'll probably be, like you said, Caleb Wilson, Jaren Stevenson, and Henry Veesaar as the 3, I don't even call them posts, the 3 tall guys on the team at any given time, and then they'll fill in with the guards and the wings from there. So I do think that's what's going to happen, and the only reason it hasn't happened is because Trimble got hurt. But let me add one more thing. There will be an opportunity, I think, in December They've got, two of the games are you would expect to be tough in Georgetown and Ohio State. But then they got a stretch there of 3 games, all home games, where again you hope that High and Brown and Jaden Young can get a bunch of minutes and just get a little confidence going, because they will be needed before the end of the season, I'm pretty sure.
Because I think that's what Hubert Davis is trying to do, as you alluded to. He's trying to get these guys a chance to earn the trust, right? You can't just do that in practice. At some point, it has to come when the lights are on. And so, for all the same folks that are bagging on, UNC not developing big men, you can't also bag on Hubert Davis for playing these guys, against decent competition as well. You can't have it both ways, I guess. Sean, if they were to go to a kind of a 5-out style, I feel like Jaron Stevenson could probably defend the post some. I don't think you want to do it for more than about one segment, but do you feel like that, that they can overcome the typical rim protector that they would not have with Veesaar on the bench, even though he's not a rim protector in the honest sense of the word?
I mean, I think this is going to come based on who you're playing. Michigan State had at the 4 or 5 two very physical, physical bigs. So they were going to go to those guys as soon as they saw High or Brown come in, or if Stevenson had guarded them, same thing. I think we've seen Stevenson play the 5 in small possessions here already. I think we saw him play the 5 at Alabama as well, even though they had him predominantly at the 3. But once again, he doesn't have the strength or just the physique to bang consistently. But I think at this point in time, he does have the height, he does have the length, at least to try to bother them. I think Wilson, you don't want to tax him too much just from either foul trouble or just tiring him out. But he exerts a lot of energy if he's going to front the post, or if he's going to make it very challenging to get the ball into the post player. And, using Kentucky as an example, probably not great post guys. So I think that's an easier option versus teams that, hey, we see the backup coming in, we're just going to feed them relentlessly. Then I think it's going to be a challenge. But we always talked about, you need, going back to the Roy Williams, you have those stable of 3 bigs, that the 4 or 5, and then one's coming in to rotate, and you're mixing that 3. And I think that's what it has to be going forward, between Veesaar, Stevenson, and Wilson. And then you can add a High or Brown in if you really need to, or, I'd rather it be High, but I'd rather he comes in. You brought up the question last week, Joey, and unfortunately it proved true, but just go in there and rebound the ball. Don't turn the ball over. Try to limit what you're doing on offense and just have a very small but meaningful role. That's still proving challenging, but I think at this point you can't bring in guys that aren't ready, both offensively and defensively. And if you're going to give up stuff on the defensive end, at least you have your most talented offensive players in there to try to balance it out.
So 2 things. I think one, Carolina's fortunate that even though it's only been 7 games, that Henry hasn't had, or Veesaar hasn't had more foul trouble. Last year, Arizona, per 40 minutes, he was at 5 fouls per game. So he was fouling a lot. This year, he's cut it down tremendously. Hasn't really been in foul trouble in the second half at all. So that's a positive. So that's a good thing there. But I think this is also where, frankly, coaching comes into play, right? If you know that there are limitations in that spot, how can you create an advantage for your team based on the personnel you have that helps them weather those 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes each game? And that's on Hubert Davis and the staff to try to figure out exactly what to do. And maybe the solution is what you said, Joey, is Stevenson some more, and maybe downshifting some guys and trying to play a little faster with a quote unquote smaller lineup. Maybe that's the solution. But I'm curious to see what they have, because again, there's not going to be many teams as physical, as powerful, as old as Michigan State. But that kind of is the kryptonite to UNC, and it's something we've talked about all offseason, was that when it came to a muscular, grinded out, grown men type of game, that's where UNC could get in trouble, because Caleb really, Veesaar, to his credit, has battled more than I thought he maybe would.
Yeah.
But they've never had guys, they don't have guys who are like already really have the girth and weight and size and muscle mass to like really go in there and be powerful. So they're more, I don't say finesse because that makes it sound bad, but they are a different type of bigs. And playing a team like Michigan State was always going to be a challenge for them. So that is as close to a team that Carolina does not want to see in the NCAA tournament. That profile is not who they want to see.
Well, and the cynic in me and all the other folks that are listening to the show are probably thinking right now that come March, when that bracket is revealed, that Tom Izzo and his friends will be sitting very precariously close to this North Carolina roster. But yeah, it's I agree with you. It's as close to North Carolina's kryptonite as you'd want to be. I mean, I would rather baptize a cat than try to play Michigan State again. It's tough. They are pretty diligent. They stick to what they want to do, and all of the things that we just saw in this game is kind of the perfect display of what Michigan State basketball is.
But I mean, sorry, you got just the frustration of losing to Michigan State, even though they are a good team. But you guys both brought it up that the deficit in athleticism is gonna, the guard play. They have such a strong front court. The guard play has to pick it up. We're not going to all of a sudden add elite athletes at the guard spot that are dominating the opposing guards, which we've seen many times in the past. But they can't be, what we saw the past week between getting nothing from Evans and Luka not being able to shoot. So it's going on them to step it up, or to Dixon to pick it up off the bench. And obviously we'll get Trimble back and see how that flows. But if they're going to be, kind of a lower tier ACC backcourt, then I think we know how the season's going to go despite some of the talent. So it really is more on them. And if they're playing not at an all-star level, but if they're playing, 80%, 90% up to their potential, then they beat that Michigan State team, in my opinion.
Yeah. And again, even like Sherrell said a second ago, with all of the bad that happened, North Carolina had their chances. And that's where you'd like to think they're able to get some of those things fixed and are able to execute a little better in certain situations as they continue to get used to themselves. Big time winners over the weekend were Johnny T-Shirt. Johnny T-Shirt, huge winners. And they're always winners. I mean, Johnny T-Shirt's probably undefeated and unscored upon. Make sure that you show them some love. Cyber Monday is tomorrow as we're recording this on Sunday evening, but hit Johnny T-Shirt up. Amazing discounts, kind of on the heels of Black Friday. Check them out. Johnny T-Shirt, great sales, stuff that you need to see. And if you're excited about Johnny T-Shirt like we are, and you might want to advertise on this here show, hit me up. That I think very highly of our supporters, and always want to try to show them as much love as we can, because we really do know that they kind of make this show happen. So if you or your business would like to be in front of a bunch of diehard Carolina basketball fans on a weekly basis, both live and in podcast form and on YouTube, let me know. Joey@InsideCarolina.com. Let me know what you're thinking. If you're the right fit, maybe we can work something out. And you could also get the same appreciation from us as Johnny T-Shirt does. Johnny T-Shirt, know that you're hitting them up. JohnnyT-shirt.com. Use the premium code found on the message boards. As we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming up this week at Rupp Arena and then home against Georgetown. If you're listening to us, there might be some national ads in here. Just hang tight. Nothing's changing for the folks on YouTube. All right. Joey Powell here for Inside Carolina. Coast to Coast podcast. We just got done breaking down all of the happenings of the past week in Fort Myers. Now, leaning into the fact that UNC's got another one on Tuesday as we get into the ACC SEC Challenge. I mean, I think Duke's hosting Florida, UNC's at Kentucky. I mean, there's some pretty good looking games coming up this week, so be sure that you're ready for those. But let's talk a little bit about Kentucky. They both share the fact that they only have lost one game, and both teams lost to Michigan State. I think what Michigan State did to Kentucky was probably a steroided out version of what they did in North Carolina. But going into Rupp is not a casual Tuesday, right? Rupp Arena gets loud, gets emotional. And Kentucky's athletes have always fed on that chaos. And I think this is an opportunity for North Carolina to show some poise. Can they execute when they can't hear? Can they run an offense when the floor is tilted against you a little bit? Can these guards stay composed when Kentucky starts throwing, some waves of momentum at you? I think this might be a guard game for North Carolina. And coming off of this game against Michigan State, I can see why it might cause some folks some heartburn. I think Carolina's guards have to handle the ball, stay aggressive, and avoid those 4-minute scoring droughts. Sherrell, do you think this is much of a guards game as it might look like on paper, especially on the heels of that Michigan State game?
I think so, because Mark Pope is a longtime coach and he kind of knows what he's doing. That's why one of the reasons he's got the Kentucky job. So I'm sure he was watching that game on Thursday to see exactly how UNC matched up with Michigan State and how Michigan State attacked UNC's guards defensively and what they did. So I'm sure he's going to utilize some of the same game plan that Michigan State did. Now, they are without a couple of players and, they are a differently built team than Michigan State. So even though they might try to take advantage of the same issues, I don't know if they have the personnel necessarily to play in the same way that Michigan State did. But as you said, Kyan Evans and Luka Bogovac they're going to have to make shots. I think that's really, I don't want to say it comes down to that because that's oversimplifying. But if there's one thing we learned last week is that you can't shoot 4 for 23 from 3 against a top 10 team and expect to win.
You can do that against hardly anybody and expect
right. That's one lesson I learned. Besides that, though, I do think that the guards are going to have to play better. And one thing we've talked about it a little bit, but Kyan Evans, his assist rate is actually pretty good. It's just that the turnover rate is commensurate. He's almost at 1-to-1 turnovers to assists. So you'd like to see those turnovers just drop just a little bit over the next few games. His 3-point percentage, just make a couple shots to keep the defense honest and then continue playing and distributing the ball like he has. So if he can do those 3 things, that helps Carolina a ton. Because like we always say, whatever term you want to use, gravity, whatever. If Kyan Evans is making shots, that opens up stuff for Caleb Wilson and Henry Veesaar. And we know that's the strength of UNC's team.
What do we need from Kyan Evans if we're UNC staff, Sean? I mean, I think that I don't want to make you have to put him on a certain point count like you do with UNC's 3-point makes. But is there something specific that you need to see out of Kyan Evans to advance this team offensively?
Offensively, I mean, you need him at 10 plus points per game. You need him hitting 2 to 3 threes per game. That was what he was brought in to do was to shoot. I think when you looked at his profile last year, you said, hey, this is a more of a combo guard that shot lights out from 3. And I think that's what they were putting their money in was from the 3-point shooting and the consistency. You knew you weren't going to get what you had in Cadeau from an athletic perspective, but I think you need to see what he did in the NCAA tournament against Maryland and Memphis, where he is making a presence on the court. I think from a size perspective and a length perspective, it's always going to be a challenge for him defensively or to do certain things. But once again, simple play is the quick pick and roll with Henry. Trying to get that 3rd or 4th pass for open shots. It takes him a little while to load. So how is he moving to get those open shots? Looking to get in for some of those 4 to 12-foot shots that maybe the defense is giving, but he has to really come in because right now, and you look at Kentucky, I think they have an advantage at the bigs, 4-5 of Kentucky has 3 guys injured, as Sherrell mentioned. So there are some injuries. They have Moreno, freshman big, who's been playing well, but he just got put into the lineup.
Two names that fans of this show might remember: Jasper Johnson and Malachi Moreno.
Yep. And just to specify, when you say they have an advantage, you mean Carolina has an advantage?
Yes. Okay, Carolina has an advantage.
I was about to come for you. I was like, Sean. Okay.
No, I mean, Moreno's been playing well, but Veesaar should have that advantage. Wilson, Cam Williams, probably one of the best full of Sherrell on that one, transfer portal commits that they got. And he stepped into the starting lineup the past 2 games. And I think that's a matchup that Wilson should be able to take advantage of, but he's going to have his hands full defensively as well. So then once again, it comes down to the guards where Kentucky has size. They're going 6'4" to 6'5" across the 1 through 3. And then they have depth in terms of bringing Jasper Johnson and some other guys off the bench. So it is going to be, there's going to be a lot on Luka's shoulders to start hitting a little more consistently. I've liked his playmaking that he's had in the half court. Trying to find Evans, is it getting the ball out of his hands in transition and trying to find him after the fact, or is it? But I think at a baseline, that 10 to 12 points has to be happening, or else you need Dixon in there to facilitate a little more if that's what's needed. So that's kind of the barometer I would look at. But you brought him in to shoot. You brought him in as a main shooter, and you need 2 to 3 threes from him per game.
From a strategy standpoint, how would you like to see North Carolina attack Kentucky? Or where might you think North Carolina has an advantage? You mentioned a couple of matchups there, but where do you think North Carolina might have a schematic advantage?
Well, I think offensively, this is no different than Carolina, right? There's still a very new team, more injuries, so the pieces are still being put together. They got blitzed by Louisville. They made it somewhat close. Granted, that was on the road. They made it somewhat close at the end, and then they got beat pretty bad on a neutral court by Michigan State. So here's their first chance, a big game at home. So they've got the home crowd, which is why they're going to be 8.5, 9-point favorites, which is pretty significant. But I think once again, it goes back to what we saw in that second half of Kansas, of the movement they had offensively. Now you might not shoot 60%, that's fine, but the more you can get them out of position, because once again, athletically, the guards, Denzel Aberdeen, pretty athletic, pretty quick, has size. Chandler has size. Owa has size and strength. So the more you just get them out of position, and once again, that third to fourth pass, you have the gravity of Henry, now Caleb as well. I would love to see Caleb, his decision making has to get a little bit quicker, where he can't just, I think, isolate and try to go one-on-one. So I do want to see him pull a little bit back out and look a little more in the high-low action that we saw early on. So I think taking advantage of, they're going to focus on Veesaar and Wilson, and just making sure that there's off-ball movement going on from the other guys to get open looks, making quick decisions, and putting, once again, being the aggressor. Michigan State was the aggressor after they went down 7. And, I think Luka, if he can hit a few more threes, he has just that craftiness and that ability to not blow by people, but to get a step and to get shots off. So I think he just needs to have it from 3 to open things up a little bit more. And then depth, even with those 300 players, Kentucky still has a significant advantage. I think every team's going to have an advantage. So you need Powell, I think, to continue to play well, and Stevenson defensively to take some of the pressure off everybody of continuing some strong defensive play.
Sherrell, I think one of the things that might be downplayed about Caleb Wilson, if there is such a thing, is the energy that he brings all the time might be contagious, right? I think everybody recognizes the energy he brings, but I feel like when he starts doing that, it lifts the rest of the team. And specifically going into a massive road environment like they're going to see at Rupp, is there a such thing as Caleb Wilson being, too energetic to start a game like this?
It is something that I think you have to consider. And so let's set the stage for a lot of people. Really, until last December, it was presumed that Caleb Wilson was going to Kentucky. That was everyone's thought. That was kind of what the national folks thought. I think some people, maybe even at Carolina, thought that that's where he's going to be. Him and Jasper Johnson were liking each other's stuff on social media, and him and Caden Lewis were talking about how they were going to throw alley oops together. So there's that at play. The Kentucky fan base feels kind of jaded towards Wilson because they feel like he stood him up and chose Carolina. So there's that. Put that to the side, right? On Saturday, on Saturday, Kentucky lost in football to their rival worse than Carolina lost to their rival. It's 41-0. Kentucky's football coach is embroiled in, will he or won't he? Will they fire him? Will they not fire him? His buyout, all that stuff. So put that to the side. They lost to Louisville in basketball 2 weeks ago. The interview that Pope gave after Michigan State, he just looked sad and confused. There's been rumors of turmoil within the team. There's just a whole bunch of stuff going on. So you've got all of those elements coming into a game that they severely need. So it's going to be an angry, fired up crowd who's going to try to will their team to a win because their team, frankly, needs to win. They've got Gonzaga after this, so they like really need to win this home game. So you add all that together, and I do worry that Caleb might come out and try to, I don't want to say do something that he's not capable of because he's capable of doing pretty much everything, but just be a little too amped up because he wants to show them what they missed. He wants to try to, just stick it to him, basically, for lack of a better phrase. So I worry about that a little bit, but I think he's mature enough to be able to handle it. And be able to not let it overcome him. But make no mistake, Carolina is walking into a cauldron on Tuesday. There's a lot of pin-up stuff in that Kentucky fan base from the football team, the basketball team, that's going on, and they are going to let loose on Carolina because that's the blue blood who's coming in, and frankly, they need the win. It reminds me a lot of that Tennessee game that Carolina had a couple years ago, because if you're Kentucky, you can't. In their mind, they can't lose to Louisville, Michigan State, and UNC in the same season. That is, that's just something they can't comprehend. So Carolina's going to have to match their energy. And I think Wilson, like you said, is a huge part of it.
So what I'm hearing you say is that Kentucky fans are going to be big mad on Tuesday. And I think that North Carolina, once again, just like they did against St. Bonaventure and Michigan State, are going to need to match energy, except this time there's 20,000 people sitting around the court that are going to also have energy that North Carolina's got to find a way to weather.
Now, the good thing, Joey, is with that frustration and that pin-up energy, if Carolina were to somehow get it to an early lead, get up 21-8 or something like that, the pressure on that team is going to be out of control. Yeah. It's going to be crazy because there might be a little boo here, a little boo there. And the team is feeling it. So it's like, that's the kind of, I guess, dichotomy of like how it could go. If UNC is able to get a lead, they could just implode on themselves. Carolina's done it before. We've seen it before, happen to them before in big games. But they also could come out with their hair on fire, and Carolina just has to stay, within reach, into the second half. So I think either one is just as likely.
I am most fascinated to see how Caleb Wilson plays in his first true road environment, because this will be that times infinity. On Tuesday night. All right, before we get out of here, let's also look.
And maybe we get a Caleb Wilson, David Noel type dunk in this game. Which was that the last time they won at Rupp?
2007.
2008.
2008. Okay, so that was after David Noel then. Okay, sorry. So let's look a little bit towards this Georgetown game next weekend as well. After the Kentucky game, there's going to be some sort of emotional hangover. But North Carolina cannot afford to come home flat after this Kentucky game, no matter what happens. They've got to, I guess, make this game against Georgetown boring in a good way, right? I think that they need to find a way to get back to the way they were playing in a very workmanlike fashion a couple of weeks ago against Georgetown, regardless of what happens in Rupp Arena. Sherrell, what do you need to see for this team to show that the Georgetown game won't be a trap game?
Win it. That's not one where you prove points or you try to make sure you're up by 20 for net. That's the game you just need to go and win, because there have been many times in the Hubert Davis era and frankly in the Roy Williams era where there have been teams with that kind of profile who have come into the Smith Center, had a Carolina's, sleepy from the game before or sleepy from exams or the weekend, and it takes them into the under 4 timeout of the second half to really take control of the game. The Georgia Tech game last year, I think, is a great example, where it's probably one of the ugliest basketball games in the history of basketball. I think with Carolina win 66, 65 or something like that. That's the type of game that's the type of game you have to avoid. And we're putting a lot on his shoulders, but he's asked for it. That's when Caleb Wilson's energy needs to be there to kind of keep UNC from doing what it's done in the past. And that's coming out sleepy against an opponent who, while good, shouldn't win at the Smith Center. So that's what I'm looking forward to most on that one, is just making sure you avoid that sleepiness that's happened. And Caleb Wilson will be a big part of that. And while I'm monopolizing time, just to go back to Kentucky real quick, Joey, the stat that worries me about them, granted, these are against two bad teams who, rank in the 300s on Torvik and Kempom, but in 2 games at home last week, Kentucky was 25 of 57 from 3. So Carolina's going to have to watch out for the shooters. They're home. They're comfortable.
Ugh, I could have done without that. Sean, quick word about Georgetown. They're 5-2. They've got some pretty significant guards, in a sense that guys that are going to try to play old school Georgetown ball. I mean, if you've seen them at all this year, they do remind you of kind of some of those old John Thompson squads. Maybe not as talented, but definitely in their style of play. What do you expect North Carolina to be up against schematically against Georgetown?
Well, it would have been great if Georgetown had kept their hot streak going and didn't just lose their last 2. But yeah, from a guard perspective, some very talented guards from Malik Mack, who came from the Ivy League, played at Georgetown last year. Then KJ Lewis from Arizona, who is an elite athlete, not the greatest of shooters, but from athleticism perspective is probably in that 98th percentile in college basketball. And then you've got I'll go to Sherrell for the pronunciation, but Julius, the big man who UNC tried to look at a few years ago.
Haliafadawa.
Yep, exactly. Who's been playing pretty well. So to me, once again, this will be a great game for Trimble, where you're putting him on Mac and giving him trouble. But I think it's one where defensively they have to almost feed off the home crowd to an extent, or they have to create that excitement early on defensively and frustrate Georgetown. Offensively, they should have an advantage in the bigs, and from a just overall talent perspective, they have that. Georgetown's not a super deep team either, so it is going to come down to those 2 or 3 key guys on Georgetown, and are you containing Mac and KJ Lewis in my mind.
All right, fellas, good show. Appreciate y'all getting that. Anything else, that you guys want to look at about these 2 games? I mean, I feel like this week is going to tell us a lot, whether the Michigan State game was a snapshot or whether it was a preview of kind of who this team is becoming. Final thoughts, Sherrell?
I would say take the games in isolation personally, because even before the season, I think everybody who looked at the schedule said, "Ooh, playing at Rupp, right after Thanksgiving is going to be a tough one to win." Now they might have assumed that they beat Michigan State, but I don't view, if they lose on Tuesday, which I personally would be surprised if they win, just because that's a really tough environment. But if they were to lose on Tuesday, I don't think it's because of Michigan State. I think it's because they played a desperate Kentucky team at Rupp. The how will have a lot to say about it. If it's another poor shooting game, then you start talking about trends again and what may be the issue with this particular team. But I don't think Michigan State and Kentucky, to me, should really be viewed together because they're so different environments.
Sean, same question for you, man. Anything you want to get out there before we wrap up shop tonight?
Well, Sherrell hit on it with Kentucky's 3-point shooting. So I think that has to be a big focus defensively, especially between Chandler and Aberdeen, who have shot the ball very well. And then you have Williams, who has not shot the ball well, but he's going to fire from 3. And he shot the ball pretty well last year at Tulane. So they've got some guys that can hit. And I think it's going to be important to just make them uncomfortable early on, especially given their size, because that's how I think the game can get away early if they are hitting those threes and getting good looks, and then it just feeds off of each other. Same with Jasper Johnson coming off the bench. We know his hot and cold streaks, as Sherrell got to see at Peach Jam many a times. But I also think, coming to the coaching perspective, and we haven't traditionally seen this, so I'm not really expecting it, but I do think from a management perspective, right, this is not a team that is going to overwhelm you with talent. Going back to the Final Four run, Sherrell used to say when they're going through the losing streak, from a talent perspective, this team can compete with anybody. This is, I'd say, not a team that can compete with anybody. And it's a team that has struggled offensively a lot, especially compared to what we've seen in Feast Week and a lot of other schools nationally do from a points perspective. So I think there just needs to be a little more control of the game, some more set plays. If things are going bad, how do you manage it? If you get a lead, you can't let it go, be given. We saw it both in St. Bonaventure and in the 7 points in Michigan State, how quickly those leads went. You have to try to diffuse things earlier on. I think we will see a shortened lineup that will hopefully help that, but I think you just need to try to put everybody in the right place, and you don't need to use that one timeout, for the under 30 seconds where you're still going to get a bad shot up anyway. Let's use it in the first half to stem, to quell some of the momentum. But I do think the coaching staff needs to control things a little bit more to try to sneak out of there with a win.
Sorry, for real, my last thing. If foul trouble is an issue, they have to have one of Wilson and Veesaar on the court all 40 minutes. It doesn't have to be both of them, but one of them has to be in the game at all times. They don't have the depth right now to withstand that. So that's what I'm looking for. Again, pending foul trouble.
All right. Well, you said that was the last thing, so I'm gonna hit the end button before you pile on and throw something else out here. But either way, I appreciate the insight you guys always bring to the show. Should be a fun week. Definitely some good ball on the horizon. Michigan State, nobody likes to lose, but will be interesting to see how this team continues to develop. Tuesday night, 9:30, late start against Kentucky at Rupp Arena, and then Sunday at 5 against Georgetown. So we'll figure out whether this is going to be the post game or if there will be a post game and maybe we'll go a different night. I'm not sure, but just hang tight. Either way, we appreciate you guys sticking by us and joining us again. If you'd like to advertise on the show, hit me up, joey@insidecarolina.com. Love to talk to you. Shout out to John Siegley for producing, to Sherrell and Sean for being a part of this show, and to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. But until next time, for the Coast to Coast and for Inside Carolina, I'm Joey Powell. Y'all make it a great week.